After about 6 months of sustained spread across nearly 200 countries of the world and a brief period of relief, the COVID-19 pandemic has been making a more devastating comeback. The worst-hit countries of Western Europe and the United States have been forced into adopting more drastic measures aimed at stemming the impact of the second and, in some places, third wave of infections, hospitalizations, and death. Remarkably, Nigeria and indeed much of Africa have been minimally affected, but with vaccines gradually taking center stage, there's a widespread feeling of light at the end of the tunnel, and predictably, the big vaccine race is on. How serious should Nigeria be taking the issue of vaccines, and what demographics should be priority when those vaccines arrive? Again, with storage, transportation, and speed or pace of administration emerging as crucial factors in this race, what brand of vaccines should Nigeria be aspiring to purchase? What is fueling the current spike in infections, and how is the issue of hospitalizations playing out? How seriously is the ongoing COVID complacency impacting the number of active cases, and how successful has Lagos State's COVID-19 intervention been? We're now being joined for a chat by Dr. Iorhen Akase, Consultant Infectious Diseases Specialist and Head Infectious Diseases Unit, College of Medicine, Lagos University Teaching Hospital. Welcome to the program, Doctor. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Akase. Quickly, let's start with the sudden spike in cases of infection in Nigeria. Yesterday, the NCDC reported 930 infection cases. The actual number will probably be higher, but consistently in the last few weeks, we've been seeing the number of infections rising. What do you think is responsible for this? Is it cause for us as citizens to panic? What should government do? And what precautions do we need to take as government and as people?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Abati. The second wave of, or multiple waves other countries have had, and the third or fourth waves now of infections with COVID-19 is something that we have to live with. It's a reality for us until we achieve the kind of immunity that is needed to do that. Unfortunately, as a country and as a people, there was a premature jubilation by many people that, COVID is gone. So we are witnesses today to how the fact that people are now doing parties and you go to places where nobody is putting on face masks and social distancing is almost non-existent. So it was inevitable that the moment we are reopening, workplaces and people are interacting, it's inevitable until the vaccine is widespread that cases of resurgences of vaccines are going to do that. So it goes back to the basics of applying those three major things of one, putting on the face covering, very important. Two, hand hygiene. And thirdly, social distancing. Unfortunately, we're not paying attention to these things. And government, well, for one, needs to reinforce this as a whole. There are countries that are talking about mask mandates. And at the moment, you go to government facilities, you go to you see people are not, paying attention to that. People are wearing masks wrongly and all that. These are basic things. And so long as we're not paying attention to them, then we're going to keep having increased number of cases, as we are seeing in the recent reports.
And what about the provisions for those increased number of cases? The government recently announced that isolation centers should be reopened. What happened there? Was there a total relaxation? Were they shut down completely? What is the status with drugs, the therapy given to patients in isolation centers? And how do you think that the reemergence of this pandemic has affected treatment in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we all know that to a large extent, this is not just Nigeria. Most countries in the world were not prepared for the COVID pandemic when it came. So most of the structures that were put in place, whether it was logistic structures, whether it was treatment structures, isolation facilities, most of these were temporary. And state governments and the federal government, with the assumption was that we'll put in temporary structures, attack this head on, and then we'll move on. So I'm aware that there were states, without going to names, that shut down almost all of their treatment facilities with this, expectation that COVID is gone. I can tell you for sure that even in the Southwest here, there are states that you do not have a currently functional isolation facility. So, and that really played into the hands of, because at the end of the Lagos State, for example, did a great job at this. So a lot of people are aware that at the time when we were having around May, June, July, we had a lot of centers that were open, but afterwards, some of them had to be closed down because they were temporary structures. But we did have some that remained open. The mainland hospital remained open. LUTH isolation facility also remained open, but however, we're functioning at a reduced capacity. So Lagos State knew in a way, in terms of staff and the structures put in place, there was, capacity to be able to expand quickly if, and now that we're seeing surges, that is the case. But I can tell you that most states in the country, that is not the case. So treatment-wise, I think as a country, we've gotten, a good experience about what worked and what didn't work. We know now that, unlike the first outbreak where everybody was taken to hospital, some against their will, if you know what I mean, now we know that's not the case. A reasonable number of people can be managed at home. Just those ones that need, a lot of medical care will be managed in treatment centers. So in this aspect, we're not going to need so much of the treatment facilities that were needed at the beginning. So it only means that just optimizing what we have now. So in that aspect, really, I wouldn't say we should panic. It's not cause for panic, really, because that doesn't help. It worsens things. But I would say there's cause to sit down and be very strategic in the way we approach this, because the way we approach the second wave now will not be the way we approach the first one, because we're not going to carry everybody. And there are some treatments now we know that do not work. So we're not going to be bombarding people with this kind of treatment. We're going to be we are now targeted in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and how we'll go about providing care for the people that come in.
I just want to press further based on Tundu's question. I want to take stock. I remember then we're talking about a lot of ventilators. Do we still have those ventilators? Are they still working? A lot of people invented ventilators, sent them as gifts. I think America even sent some to Nigeria at a point in time. Do we still have all of those materials? And somebody would have thought that most of the money we spent, and I'll give you an instance, like the Landmark Center, for instance, that was shut down after a couple of months. It was spent, 1 billion was spent to set up. So that money will have just wasted. Somebody will have thought that money will have been used to increase the number of primary healthcare centers that we don't have too much on along these Victoria Islands to Lekki axis. So what's the state of play now as regards those infrastructure? Are those ventilators still working?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Rufai. I think, while I may not be in a position to give accurate stock about where and how some of those things that were brought in were used, what I can say for sure, the Landmark, for example, that you mentioned, what I know for sure is that when they closed, most of the facilities that were there were distributed to other healthcare facilities, some of them tertiary, for use. So, LUTH, for example, where I do know what happens there is that most of the ventilators that were distributed were functional. When COVID, and I did do some supervision in some other states in the country as well, so I can tell you that what some of the governments are trying to do is to repurpose or to direct those facilities to provide care, knowing that ventilators, for example, will find use not just in COVID, but other forms of illnesses as well. So what some hospitals and states have done is to try and direct those resources to where they're needed most. However, now we know that the typical ventilator machine, at the beginning we all thought COVID was all about ventilators. Yeah. Now we know that for COVID patients who do need to be ventilated, it's, ventilator is not the key. It's not the solution that we think it is. Now, yes, intubation, they don't do so well even when they get intubated, because by then it means that they have very complicated disease, and it's not just the fact that they're intubated that means they're going to survive. What has happened subsequently has been that subsequent non-invasive ventilators, these are ventilators that do not necessarily need that tube to go into the lungs and all that, But, you know, for most patients, they need to just sustain the oxygenation. So various forms of non-invasive ventilation, that's what they call them, non-invasive ventilation has been distributed. And this can be used at, you know, levels of care that are not necessarily ICU type. Okay, on the general ward, even in the general hospital, with the right training and the right facility, this can be used. So what I can tell you for sure is that, yes, even though, and in truth, COVID, you know, not just COVID, pandemics give us an opportunity to improve healthcare structures and systems. And I do hope that as a country we're able to do that. It may be too early to say, but what I can say for sure is that some of the things that were donated, you know, some are there. Like I said, I can't keep stock of all of them. But in LUTH, for example, I don't know that those ones that are donated are there, and we have already started using it in some of the patients that have in a better way than we would have used it earlier on at the onset of the pandemic.
Well, Dr. Akase, I would like your take on a subject we discussed earlier on this morning on this program, which is the statement made by the Minister of Health yesterday, when he said that by January, Nigeria will have access to vaccines, and that there is already a technical working group in place that is studying what kind of vaccine will be best for Nigeria, considering the fact that we have refrigeration problems, that the only kind of refrigerators we have in abundance will seem to be the regular refrigerators. Is it possible for Nigeria to get the vaccine by end of January? And what should we be doing to make sure that we're not just relying on the COVAX facility, under which we've been promised just 20% of our vulnerable population in terms of access?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Dr. Abati. I think it's true. I'm aware that, you know, the federal government has already in discussions. I set up that working group to discuss about what vaccine and how they're going to go about it. But just to put things into perspective, we're all aware that, you know, most of the companies that are producing vaccines at the moment have two provisions to distribute vaccines generally. These are simplistic. One of them is that countries can procure vaccines themselves, buy them themselves. And then secondly, of course, they can be distributed in the COVAX scheme that WHO is spearheading along with other that. Now, we know that the advanced countries like you, and we know that the commodity available now is way, way, way below the demand. And we know that countries like US, UK, Canada have booked over 4 billion doses of vaccines. Now, those contracts are already in place. So until, you know, the company, I don't depend on which company, whether it's Pfizer or AstraZeneca or Moderna, there's 2 of them, Moderna and Pfizer, that have already been approved for emergency use now. Most of the other ones are still waiting for approval in 2021. So it depends on which of these companies the federal government is talking to and what is available. Even if the government has money now to go and put on ground, it depends on the availability of that vaccine and whether those companies have fulfilled their contractual obligations to the other countries that have been paid, that paid them already. So whether it's in January is feasible, I don't know. This is one point. The second point is that we must realize that even when vaccines do come into the country, there are what we call priority groups. This is different from, you know, it's not a vaccine you can go over the counter and buy and take for yourself. Countries, what they are distributing the vaccine based on priority groups. And for most countries, the priority groups, number one, are those who are on the front lines. These are healthcare workers on the front line, social workers. In some countries, they include security personnel and social workers and all that. These are people on the front lines. They are priority number one. Number two, priority are those who are most vulnerable. That's those elder people more than 65 years and those who have comorbidities that puts them at risk of severe disease. These are the first 2 priorities. And in most countries, until these 2 categories of people have been taken care of, even in the US and UK, you cannot go now as a US citizen, UK citizen, and procure if you are not in these priority categories. So when the minister said end of January, it's important to probably, when, you know, probably if he explained further, we'll get a context that even when the first few doses come, and you must remember that the 20% that COVAX is going to cover for the vulnerable population is this is a long term. So it's going to take years. In fact, it's anticipated that it's going to be 2022, 2023 before we start seeing reasonable coverages, across the wider population. So, at the end of the journey, we'll have to be very, very, put that in context so that people understand clearly what the minister was talking about. It's not entirely dependent on the country. It's not entirely dependent on whether we have money or not. It's dependent on how much vaccines are available and what those companies are able to provide where they need to.
There have been reports in southern Britain of a new strain of COVID-19. Thankfully, it hasn't been found so far to be more severe. But have you found that to be the case in Nigeria? Is there a new strain that is potentially responsible for the surge in numbers?
Well, yeah, in the UK and US and other parts of the Western Hemisphere primarily, although there are reports elsewhere of this new strain that's causing more severe disease. In the country, and while the sequencing is still going on in some of our facilities, but what we know for now is that the new strains, the new cases that are coming up now, we're not seeing more severe cases compared to what was going on before. What we're seeing is still just an increased number of people compared to the baseline. But we're not necessarily seeing people with more severe symptoms compared to, so that's from the clinical point of view. Secondly, even as late as, or as recently as November, while we're in a discussion with one of the laboratories doing sequencing, he did tell us that, yes, we're having some diverging, variants that are not true to the original form, which is not uncommon or unexpected with viral outbreaks. As infections go from one person to the next, you're going to have those variants, occurring. However, what we know for sure is that this may not necessarily affect the kind of care that's provided to them. And for now, there's no reason to think that puts a threat to the vaccines that are being rolled out. So in the country at the moment, while I can't say for sure because that is still going on, whether we have documented that particular strain that is causing new outbreaks elsewhere, what I can tell you for sure is that we have documented some variants in strains. However, we don't think that they are responsible for the resurgence primarily. What is responsible for the resurgence is primarily down to the fact that people have become complacent. We're not paying attention to the basic rules of engagement concerning COVID-19, and it's unexpected. Like I said, other countries are in their fourth waves now. So we are it was always expected that we're going to have a second spike, and that's what we're having now, primarily down to the fact that we have become complacent corporately and individually as a people.
Right. Doctor, I want to ask a very technical question here. It saddens my heart that Nigeria played a very prominent role in the first genome sequencing of this virus itself, to be able to know the strain and things. A lot of work was done out of, Nigerian labs and everything. So if we can sequence, the genome of this virus, why didn't we do any work as regards the vaccine race? Because you will think that the vaccine was created as a result of knowing what was the sequence like of the genome, and then you can do some work and do further work and either go the way of an attenuated strain vaccine, which a lot of people are not using, but they're using the messenger mRNA and the likes. So why couldn't we carry that research work a little bit further? And by now, we should even be part of the vaccine race. And I want to know the data collected. I don't know if you have information as regards the data collected by NAFDAC then, by some, herbal medical practitioners that they said showed some promising signs. Didn't we get anything from it again? Didn't that research go further? Didn't we consolidate on that research? 2 questions, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Seni. Okay, so 2 questions. So let me start from the last one. So concerning the research on traditional medications, I think it's rather unfortunate that this had to do with the speed with which our institutions, process things. It took a long time for the regulatory approvals for those researches to come to light. I'm aware that because I'm involved in one of them, that eventually after a lot of back and forth, two of them rather, are going to start doing clinical trials now. They're just starting doing the clinical trials for those products now. So it goes to show that apart from what the labs are doing, and they're doing great work, and I can attest, because I'm involved in most of this, I can attest to the ingenuity and the resilience of scientists and practitioners involved in this field. But as we all know, there's a lot of regulatory processes to go through, and that really slowed down a lot of what would have happened. So, well, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel concerning some of those indigenous products, which are going to be in the market, which are going to start clinical trials very soon, phase 3 clinical trials, which I'm aware of too, because I'm involved in one of them. Now, to the first question about vaccine and the capacity for vaccine development in the country. What I can tell you for sure, again, like I said, I'm involved, NIMR, with Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, the Redeemers University Laboratory in Ede, and a host of other indigenous have done a lot of work and have identified what they call candidates. They call them vaccine candidates. Because vaccine candidates simply means that, on paper, what this can do. And if you put this together with these potential, like you say, identifying attenuated strains that can be useful. So in the country, we have identified a lot of vaccine candidates that can, move on to that. However, we do know that the infrastructure for vaccine development is advanced, and that you know that when you identify a vaccine, you need to take it through animal studies, then you need to take it through phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials, before you do a phase 3 trial, which is what is widespread, which is needed for even emergency use approval. So the truth of the matter is that you have to have manufacturing capacity to be able to produce that vaccine in its finished form and finalize issues around storage, around the genetics, around the side effects and all of that, which is a huge undertaking, requiring not just infrastructure, but requiring millions and millions, sometimes billions of dollars in the undertaking, which at the moment, as far as I know, we don't have that capacity in the country. Well, we do have vaccine research, and structures in the country, but for something that is so novel and something that a lot is going on at the moment, I don't think we do have that kind of funding. When I say infrastructure, it also requires funding. It also requires regulation and all that. At the moment, we don't have what those other people have. So we simply cannot go into a vaccine race with them. That's one. Two. Like I said, manufacturing capacity. Now, vaccines, the line between an effective vaccine and a dangerous vaccine is very thin. Vaccines are not like medicines, where you are therapeutics, where you have a slightly wider therapeutic window. For vaccine, the line is very narrow, where in the bid to provide, there's an adage in medicine says, do not make your cure more grievous than the illness itself. So in the bid to provide, protection, you have to maintain that thin line so that, because the attenuated strain can easily become, a dangerous one and, cause another outbreak, which could be worse than, what you originally thought. So at the moment, we still have a long way to go to provide an enabling environment, but in terms of our scientists and what they are doing under difficult circumstances, you have no idea what our people have done in terms of, making the best of a bad situation. But simply the enabling environment is not just there at the moment for them to develop from a vaccine candidate all the way through clinical trials to approval. And I don't think we have the capacity in the country at the moment.
Well, on that note, we would like to thank you very much, Dr. Akase, for joining us on the morning show today. Thank you very much indeed.